The rain in northern France had a way of turning earth into memory. It soaked through boots, through coats, through bones, until even time felt damp and slow. Along a stretch of churned mud near St. Lo in the spring of 1944, men in khaki crouched beneath a gray sky, their rifles wrapped in oilcloth, their eyes hollowed by 5 years of war. These were British veterans, French resistance fighters, Polish volunteers, soldiers who had lived the war's rhythm since its first ugly drumbeat in 1939. They spoke little, smoked often, and measured courage in the distance between one artillery shell and the next. And then, one morning, something strange rolled ashore with the tide of reinforcements. They arrived in waves, stepping off landing craft with wide shoulders and wider grins, their helmets set too straight, their uniforms too clean. American soldiers, GIs they called themselves, flooded the European front like a gust of wind in a room gone stale. They chewed gum, carried swing music in their pockets, and wrote home about the adventure of war. They seemed, at first glance, like boys in a man's fight. But there was something electric in their stride, a kind of reckless optimism that felt both naive and invincible. Corporal Arthur Hensley of the British 7th Armored Division watched them unload crates labeled with unfamiliar luxuries: canned peaches, chocolate bars, cartons of cigarettes. "Bloody tourists," he muttered under his breath, though the corners of his mouth betrayed a smile. He had been fighting since Dunkirk, when Britain's back was against the wall. He had lost friends in North Africa, buried brothers in Italy. To him, war was a grim, unrelenting machine. But these newcomers, they treated it like a problem to be solved. The Americans trained differently. Their officers encouraged initiative, sometimes even disobedience, if it meant getting the job done. They joked with sergeants, questioned orders, and shared cigarettes with privates from other platoons. It was a democracy in uniform, a fighting force built less on centuries of drilled discipline and more on a restless, industrial confidence. Their tanks rolled with spare parts bolted on the sides, their jeeps carried extra fuel cans and spare tires, their packs bulged with letters from home. Everything about them spoke of a nation untouched by occupation or air raids, a nation that had built an army not from desperation but from abundance. And yet, abundance had its own kind of arrogance. One evening, after a brutal skirmish near Corentin, a British captain found an American unit roasting coffee on a makeshift stove, swing tunes crackling from a portable radio. "You think this is a holiday?" he snapped, unable to contain his frustration. A young GI looked up, face streaked with soot, and shrugged. "Sir, if we forget who we are, then what's left to fight for?" It was an answer so disarmingly simple that the captain walked away without another word. The contrast deepened as the campaign wore on. The British still brewed tea in the rain. The Americans built field kitchens that served eggs and pancakes. French veterans marched with bayonets forged before the Great War. GIs unpacked mass-produced Garand rifles by the thousands. German troops, hardened by endless winters on the Eastern Front, dug in with the fatalism of men who expected to die. The Americans built baseball diamonds behind the lines. Even their language betrayed them. Where Europeans spoke of duty and sacrifice, Americans spoke of winning and going home. And in that difference lay the boldest truth of all. The U.S. soldiers had not come to endure the war, they had come to end it. It was not just material or numbers, though those were staggering. 297,000 aircraft, 88,000 tanks, more rifles than the Wehrmacht could ever hope to capture. It was a mindset, a cultural weather system that swept across the continent. They treated obstacles as engineering problems, enemies as solvable equations, and the very idea of total war as a challenge to be met with innovation rather than despair. Some allies scoffed at their optimism. Others found it infectious. "The Yanks brought more than guns," one weary British sergeant wrote home. "They brought a sense that this damned war might actually end." And yet, optimism came with its own price. Fresh troops made fresh mistakes, charging too boldly, trusting too easily, underestimating a cunning enemy that had been fighting since Poland fell. In the hedgerows of Normandy and the forests of the Ardennes, American enthusiasm collided headlong with German discipline. Blood washed away many illusions. By winter, the gum-chewing boys had learned to fight like veterans. But they never stopped being different. Even now, as they marched eastward, their boots trampling ground soaked with centuries of European grief, they hummed jazz tunes and dreamed of the futures they would build when the guns finally fell silent. To the men beside them, Scarred by Stalingrad, Dunkirk, Monte Cassino, their confidence felt alien, even reckless. But to a continent suffocating under the weight of its own history, it was also a breath of something new. And somewhere, deep in the ruins of a French farmhouse, as rain began to fall again, Arthur Hensley watched a group of GIs laughing over a tin of peaches and felt an uneasy stirring in his chest. Perhaps, he thought, these strangers might actually be the ones to finish what he had begun. But as he shouldered his rifle and turned toward the darkening horizon, a single question gnawed at him, one the coming months would answer with fire and steel. Would that boundless American optimism prove the Allies' greatest strength, or their most dangerous illusion? The bells of a small Belgian church were still cracked from the last German bombardment when the first American convoy rolled into the village. It was December 1944, bitter cold, the kind that burned skin and chewed through boots, yet the men in olive drab trucks waved as if they were on a Sunday drive. They threw chocolate bars to children who hadn't tasted sugar in years, handed Lucky Strikes to old men leaning on canes, and passed out cans of Spam as if they were gifts from another planet. To the villagers, they seemed almost surreal. Liberators, yes, but also bringers of a new and incomprehensible world. Sergeant Jack Dawson was one of them. 24 years old, a mechanic from Detroit turned infantryman, he'd never been farther from home than Ohio before the war. Now he found himself navigating roads lined with the wreckage of centuries, burned-out tanks, blackened churches, homes splintered by artillery. Yet through it all, he hummed swing tunes and scribbled letters to his sweetheart back home. "We're bringing more than bullets," he wrote. "We're bringing a piece of America with us." It was true. Wherever the Americans went, they carried their culture like a flag. Radios played jazz and big band in makeshift barracks. Baseball games broke out in the mud between patrol shifts. Even in the ruins of Aachen, a Red Cross Club Mobile rolled up to hand out coffee and donuts, a scene so bizarre that a German prisoner asked if it was some sort of trick. The war had made Europe weary, its soldiers gray with age and exhaustion. The Americans, by contrast, were fueled by something else, an unshakable faith in their own way of life, a conviction that the war was more than a fight for land. It was a fight for a future. This faith transformed everything, even strategy. When the 101st Airborne found itself surrounded in Bastogne, supplies dwindling and snow waist-deep, morale might have collapsed. But Jack and his men built a stove from scrap metal and roasted canned sausages over an open flame. They wrote Christmas cards they might never send. And when a German officer demanded their surrender, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe sent a single-word reply: nuts. It was defiance, yes, but it was also deeply, stubbornly American, a refusal to see defeat as anything but temporary. To their allies, this relentless optimism was both bewildering and inspiring. British troops, hardened by years of grim endurance, marveled at the endless stream of mail American soldiers received. 10 billion letters crisscrossing the Atlantic, carrying jokes, love stories, and news from baseball games back home. A French resistance fighter described the GIs as men who fought with one hand and dreamed with the other. Even the Soviets, suspicious and cynical, grudgingly admitted that the Americans fought like they expected to win. But optimism was more than morale. It was a weapon. The American supply chain, an industrial juggernaut without equal, kept Jack's unit awash in food, ammunition, and warm clothing, even as German divisions starved on meager rations. Where Wehrmacht soldiers boiled leather boots for soup, GIs shared Hershey bars with the locals. Where panzer crews rationed fuel, American convoys thundered forward with gasoline to spare. The sheer scale of it all felt unstoppable, a tide of men and machines backed by a nation that had not tasted war on its own soil. Yet for all their confidence, the Americans were not untouched by the cost. Jack's unit lost good men in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, their bodies buried under snow and silence. The laughter faded at times, the jazz went quiet. Still, even in grief, they clung to their belief that the war was about more than survival. It was about proving that the ideas they carried, freedom, equality, the pursuit of happiness, could outlast tyranny. And slowly, something remarkable happened. The people they liberated began to believe it too. In Paris, girls danced with GIs in the streets. In Rome, families named their sons Roosevelt. Even behind barbed wire, captured German soldiers stared in disbelief at the abundance their captors lived with. "They have more food in one day," one prisoner said, "than we had in a month." The war had begun as a clash of empires and ideologies. Now it was becoming a cultural reckoning, and the Americans were winning hearts as surely as they were winning battles. For Jack, the meaning of the war crystallized one night as he stood on a ridge overlooking the Rhine. The horizon glowed red from distant fires, and the wind smelled of smoke and pine. He thought of Detroit, of his father's factory, of the jazz clubs and movie theaters and neon lights. All of it felt impossibly far away, yet in that moment, he understood. They weren't just fighting to return home, they were carrying home forward, pushing it into a continent that had forgotten what hope looked like. When dawn broke, the order came to advance. Engines roared, boots crunched over frost, and the long green columns rolled toward the heart of Germany. Somewhere ahead lay Berlin, and with it, the end of the old world. Jack tightened his grip on his rifle, a smile tugging at his lips despite the fear gnawing beneath it. The war was far from over, and the enemy was far from broken. But America's soldiers had become something larger than themselves, a living, breathing engine of a new kind of war. And nothing, not even the weight of history, could stop it now. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.